Welcome to Biblical Viewpoints, a program brought to you by the Churches of Christ and dedicated to the restoration of New Testament Christianity. For over 30 years, it has been the intent of this program to uphold the Bible as the final authority in religious matters. You have heard man's viewpoints, but we invite you to open God's Word and join us as we search for the biblical viewpoint.
Well, Drew, today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite character. Okay. Nicest guy in the world. Satan, they call him. Right?
Yeah.
Say the nicest guy in the world, and he comes as an angel of light and frames himself in a host of ways that is very deceptive to people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so, but I think in all seriousness, I think that people have a tendency to view him in one of two faulty ways. Either overestimating his power, the devil made me do it.
Yeah.
Flip Wilson, right?
Absolutely.
Which is a hilarious skit, but the devil can't make us do anything. We're going to deal with that. Or to underestimate his power and think, I'm impervious to the devil's attacks.
Yeah.
How many once faithful teachers, preachers, elders, deacons, their wives, whatever, have we seen that, just shook the whole brotherhood because, I didn't see that coming. And I can't help but think that in those moments, what we're probably looking at is somebody that, felt like, hey, I'm a big deal in this fight here, and he can't touch me.
Yeah.
And so we let our guard down. We better be careful about that too. He was very wily. And so we're going to take a look at his person, we're going to take a look at his power, and take a look at his pressure. So who is this?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And thinking about, you were saying, nicest fellow. That's right. People look at the devil, but they don't see the devil in a lot of ways. You've seen them, I've seen them, everybody that's listening has seen them. The advertisements on the billboards, the commercials, everybody who's drinking alcohol is smiles, smiles. Beautiful. They're not showing you pictures of the divided families. They're not showing you pictures of the wrecks. They're not showing you pictures of the people killed. Gambling, the same way. Heard a gambling ad the other night. Casino or lottery, one of the two, lottery. All of this is going to the schools, and we're really supporting the schools. That's not about the kids. I'm sorry to say, but the casinos, the lotteries are not about our kids.
It's a great way to get well-meaning people say, it's okay.
Yeah, and this justifies it, or now it makes it more tolerable.
Right.
We don't see Satan there. What we see instead is something else, and he's going to come as a deceiver. You mentioned something like that. He's going to come as a wily fellow. He's going to deceive us. We've got to be very careful that we're not just looking for this, and I'll say something about this here in a moment. We're not looking for a red fellow running around with a pitchfork.
Right.
And we've got to be more perceptive than that. So let's go ahead and talk about his person. Who is Satan? Well, the name Satan itself means accuser, enemy. He is one who is against something or someone. In this case, he is the one that is against us. Now, there are some philosophical questions about Satan. When was he created? He is a created being, that's for sure. He does not have the power of self-existence like our God. God has created him. But then, does he have power? And does it set him apart from perhaps all of the other people or entities that are rebellious? I don't know about all that, but I do want to read a passage with you. This is 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. In 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, we have one very interesting remark about Satan and perhaps the other angels. In 2 Peter 2:4, if God did not spare angels, plural, when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, ... And he goes on to make the point in 2:9, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation. Now here's the thing. There are some other passages which I might say a thing or two about in just a moment. There are some other passages that in my estimation are incorrectly read as being about Satan and about these, as 2 Peter 2:4 talks about them, fallen angels. Some people go to some other passages and say, this is talking about some pre-creation event. I don't think that's right in a lot of ways. More on that here in a moment. But what we do discern from 2 Peter 2 and verse 4 is that there were multiple angels who rebelled, sinned against God, and they were cast into hell and committed to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. Why is that important? I think this. Hold this in suspect because I'm not 100% sure, but I think this. I think that Satan is the representative, the agent for the entire rebellious regime. He is one of the angels, maybe even the leader. Maybe he's the one who got the whole movement off the ground. But Satan is the representative for the rebellious crew against God. Now, that is talking about before creation, it looks like. But in this world, then, we have one of two choices. We align ourselves with the righteous, or we align ourselves with the rebellious, the wicked. And I think that Satan is the representative. He's the leader. He is the one motivating. He's the force behind all of that. So there are a couple of passages now that come to mind. Genesis chapter 3, there's this serpent. And the New Testament treats that as the devil. So says Romans 16:20. So says Revelation 12:7 through 9. The serpent, which is the devil, it says in Revelation 12:9. So it's commenting back on Genesis 3 to say that is Satan there. In Genesis and Matthew 19 treats it the beginning. Jesus treats it there. Paul treats it that way in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Other passages as well. The text insists that that's Satan. He's the deceiver. He comes in that form as a serpent in Genesis chapter 3 and deceives Adam and Eve. Deceives Eve. Adam gets duped into the thing as well. Genesis chapter 3. There's another reference to him in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 14 where he is said to be an angel of light. Even Satan comes as an angel of light. But there's one more passage. This is Matthew chapter 4 where Jesus is tempted by the devil. And I'm not exactly sure what kind of form he takes here, but it does say in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 3, just simply says, the tempter came. And then it says in 4:8, the devil took him to a very high mountain. And then in 4:11, we're reminded the devil left him. When we think about the person of Satan, what are some of the misconceptions that maybe we have about Satan? Well, I think one thing, like we've already talked about just briefly, is that some people think of Satan in a way where he's this little red fellow running around. He's got a tail, it's pointed, and he's got a pitchfork. That's just not an adequate view of Satan. Another thing that's hurting us is people watch too much television, and they get their ideas from entertainment, the media. And I had a fellow come to me after a Bible class where we were talking about some things in the biblical text about Satan. And this fellow came up to me. He said, "You seen this show?" And he listed off some show. I'm not even sure if it's appropriate or not, so I don't even want to talk about it. But he said, "Do you think that Satan's anything like the fellow?" And he went on to describe some of the things. And I ultimately just had to tell him, absolutely not. That's not the biblical portrait that we get of Satan. Some of these are very misguided. But the third thing that sometimes comes up is we go to passages, maybe like Isaiah 14, or we go to Ezekiel 28, and we say, this is talking about Satan. In fact, one of the names for Satan that often crops up in discussion is Lucifer. But I'm not sure that that's actually talking about Satan. If you look at Isaiah chapter 14, the text starts out explicitly by saying in 14:4, take up this taunt, this song, this proverb against the king of Babylon. And the text develops. Now, it's highly poetic, highly figurative, highly metaphorical. But when you get into Isaiah 14, and it mentions Lucifer in 14:12, it looks like that's a name. It actually also means star of the morning. And then you get down into 14:16, they say of this fellow, is this the man who made the earth tremble? With Isaiah 14:4, it looks clear enough. They're talking about the king of Babylon. 14:12, Lucifer, star of the morning, is a poetic remark about the king of Babylon. Sometimes we get this idea of Satan that's extremely misguided. And what will sort out our misconceptions about who the devil is? One thing, the revealed text. If it were not for the holy text, would you and I even know that Satan existed? Not as such. This is a revelation argument. We don't discern Satan by looking at the rocks and the trees. We'd never get Satan as a personage out of that. We wouldn't discern him that way. The revealed text tells us about him. And we're going to see here in a moment about his power, about his influence. Satan is a fellow who in a lot of ways is not to be trifled with. But he's also not to be taken, as Todd said, too seriously, where we think that the devil holds all the power, he holds all the cards, and he's going to make us do something. We'll talk about his influence, his power. Just remember this. We've got a choice to stand up against this person, the devil. The Bible tells us about him. He's to be taken seriously, and here is his number one effect. He helps cause sin. He's to be taken seriously. Let's think about fighting against the devil, fighting against sin. That's who he is as a person. Todd, anything else we ought to add about Satan, who he is as the deceiver, the angel of light, the serpent? Anything else we should add here?
Yeah, I think maybe the issue with the Lucifer business and connecting that to him might come from misunderstanding of 2 Corinthians 11. When it talks about him transforming himself into an angel of light, I think people may conflate son of the morning with that angel of light there. I'm not sure. I've seen that seem to be the case on the surface, at least.
The other thing that happens there is the Old Testament oppressor, that whole mindset, the mindset of the oppressor, is described really similarly in Isaiah 14, king of Babylon, and the prince of Tyre in Ezekiel 28. And sometimes there's some description there that presents them as being in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
That seems to make a connection to Genesis, and people assume then, oh, this has to be some pre-creation fall. This is the devil.
Yes.
That's probably coming in there too.
Yes, absolutely. So, his person, we know what he's about, okay? And
I should add, he works through those people.
yes, absolutely.
This is Satan working through the king of Babylon or working through the prince of Tyre.
You bet.
And he can work through me.
You bet. So he is the spirit that is in back of that, which comes to his power in the description that we have of that. Let's turn our attention to that, shall we? So let's talk about Satan's power, because we're talking about one who is described in John's gospel as the ruler of this world. In John chapter 12, verse 31, it says, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out." Similar language is used in John 14:30, John 16:11 to describe him. And so he's described as the ruler of this world. Now, it's not that he rules because the world has no choice. Okay, that's what Jesus came to do, was to fully extend the choice to mankind. And we'll see as we go that his power is, in fact, limited, and it's all bound up with our free moral agency, our choice to either follow God or not. And so he can't, the old Flip Wilson skit is funny. You know, his wife comes home and she's got this new dress. She wasn't supposed to go buy a dress. And he says, "What are you doing? Where'd you get the dress?" And she says, "Oh, the devil made me do it." She was driving along and he made the car turn off of at the exit there, and he made her go to the store and made her buy the dress. She couldn't help it. There's nothing she could do. And it's funny. He does that far better than I just described it. But have a laugh at that. But let's not think that Satan is able to just overpower us because he is described as the ruler of this world. He is a ruler that the world has chosen for themselves. And we need to keep that in mind. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 2 describes him as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. And again in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, he is called the God of this world. He is the one who blinds the minds of those who are deceived. And that's the way he deals with it. And Drew is going to deal with his pressure campaign and the way that he goes about convincing people to ultimately follow him instead of God. So he does have a realm. It's a realm of the rebellious. So he is, in a sense, the ruler of this world. He is the prince of the power of the air. He is the God of this world, if you will. But we don't want to overstate his power, because we don't want to leave anybody thinking that they have no escape. They have no way of pushing back and all of those things. There is much to be said about it. Okay, he can't force us. He cannot make you or I decide against our free will. And so you look in John chapter 10, for instance. John chapter 10, verse 17, Jesus says, "Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father." And then in John chapter 19, in his his discussion with Pilate, Pilate makes it clear in verse 10. He says, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" Now he's saying, I have power to kill an innocent man, which he did. But Jesus answered and said, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." So Jesus had power inherent to himself. He is the Son of God. Satan's power is permitted, okay, but it's still a free choice. Look in James chapter 1 here for just a moment. As James deals with the issue of temptation and sin, he says in verse 13, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone." So if you're tempted to evil, now this doesn't mean that God will not test us. He does, and actually the Greek term that's translated tempt here is also translated test elsewhere. The context has to make it clear what we're dealing with. God most certainly will test us. He tested the Israelites in allowing them to wander in the wilderness to see what was in their heart. He will allow us to encounter difficult decisions to see what is in our heart. We need those difficult decisions so that we can see what is in our heart. And that's only then can we grow and become the people that we need to be. But he does not try to get us to commit sin. God doesn't do that. Satan most certainly does, but he can't force us. Look what follows here in verse 14. "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." So who is ultimately responsible for my sin? Todd Houston. That's who's responsible for my sin. I've never once been forced to commit a sin against God. And so in James chapter 4, we come a little bit later, and we see these wars that are going on within and the battles, the lust that people are dealing with. And he says in verse 5, "Or do you think that the scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously, but he gives more grace? Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." So every time that the devil doesn't flee from us, it's because we have stopped submitting to God and resisting the devil. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And so, Drew, we see that he has power. There's no question about it. But his power is limited, and his power over us is, well, it's not power at all.
Yeah.
You're going to point out to us here that he uses pressure, and there are devious methods that he uses to pressure us into this. But he has no power whatsoever to force us into anything.
Yeah.
That's important.
Sometimes we get this other misconception. We think that Satan is like an equal opponent to Jesus. He is not.
Absolutely
That's
not.
the point that Jesus is pointing out consistently through the text. He's not on the equal playing field with God. He is a lower trying to get you to go against our superior God. Now, going back to James 1, you were talking about Satan tempting or testing, or God testing. Paul says about the thorn in the flesh, almost paradoxically, that it was both from God as a gift, but the messenger of Satan to buffet him. Now, how can that be?
Right.
It is always based on motive or agenda. The same event, let's say that it's cancer. Let's say that you get cancer or I get cancer. The same event that Satan is trying to use to pull us away from God is the same event that God is trying to use for good to pull us closer. That makes us stop and think about everything that's going on in the world, whether Satan is trying to tempt you to buy that alcohol, or if Satan is trying to tempt you to cheat on your spouse, or if Satan is trying to tempt you to lie to your boss. Whatever it is that Satan is trying to use in those environments, in those atmospheres, if he is trying to use something to pull you away from God, God is expecting you in those same events to do something that actually mimics the attitude and the mentality and the disposition of Christ.
Amen.
God is using these same things to try to pull us closer. Is God testing us? You better believe it. You better believe it. but his motive is like a teacher who knows that the lesson's been taught and is now saying, perform. As said over against a devil who's trying to give you a test that he knows he's trying to hope anyway that you can't pass. There's a difference in motive or agenda. And so now thinking about, as you just said in 4:7 of James, we ought to resist the devil. Can we do that? The text says we can. Take a look at this. In the New Testament, well, in the whole Bible for that matter, we see Satan's power is restricted, limited only to his influence. Our choice is critical. In John chapter 13, this is interesting. It's on the eve of his crucifixion, and Jesus is gathered with the disciples, and Jesus is going to wash their feet. Well, in John 13:2, it says, during the supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hands, ... If you drop down into 13:27, again it said of Judas, after the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Certainly not personally, certainly not bodily, not spatially. This is by influence. Satan has influenced Judas. Now, what do you mean? Well, didn't he get tempted with the money bag? Wasn't Judas dipping into the money bag, robbing? Wasn't he tested, tempted? And didn't he, quite contrary to the way of God, didn't he use this as an opportunity to do devilish things rather than do things that were Christ-like? You see, God tested Judas here too. And Judas could have performed so much differently, but he didn't. The influence was only allowed by Satan, and Judas made bad choices. Now, there are a couple of other passages. We looked at James 1, looked at Matthew chapter 4 only briefly a moment ago. But let me go back to Genesis and pick up one thing that's said here. After the whole episode, God is asking, he's inquiring of Adam and Eve, what happened? What happened? Now, God knew. He's not asking for information. Wife sometimes asks you questions. She's not asking for information, folks. She wants you to know. She wants to know, does this dress make me look fat? She's not asking for information, fellas. You understand me? That's not a question for information. That's a different kind of question. You need to learn how to answer that one. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 13, God's not asking for information here of Adam and Eve. In 3:13, what is this, he says, that you've done? He's not asking for information. He knows what's been done. And in 3:13, listen to this. The woman said, the serpent deceived me. Now, how's the serpent going to deceive you today? We talked about billboards a moment ago, talked about commercials. Things look good. Everybody's going to that party. Everybody's doing it. Oh, everybody had a good time. The influence, the pressure that Satan exerts not just upon our youth, which is very real, but upon us as adults is quite real. And he's deceptive. And no wonder, Paul said, for Satan himself will transform himself into an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. The devil is a deceiver. And if you are a deceiver, if you are trying to tempt somebody, you don't come and announce your plot, your schemes. You do it subtly, which is why the New Testament points out the subtlety of the devil. He's a crafty little fella. And in 1 Peter 5:8, he says, be sober, be vigilant. That is, be aware, be clear-minded. Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. You'll remember in the movie Lion King, Disney has it presented where Mufasa and Simba go out into the Pride Land, and they're going to do some hunting. And Mufasa is teaching Simba how to stay and hide in the grass. Well, that's the devil. He's not going to make his presence known. He's not going to announce his plot, his schemes. He's going to try to deceive us and tempt us. And it's easy for us to see our youth sometimes getting caught up in this trap. It's easy to see other people getting caught in the trap. But what we've got to be ultra aware about in this context is self. What is Satan doing right now, actively, to deceive me? What are the things that I'm oblivious to? Maybe I've even convinced myself they're not there. Temptation is going to be by deception. And sometimes our worst deceiver is ourselves. Listen to this. I heard a story years ago. Krispy Kreme Donuts was giving out free donuts. I don't know if they still do that or not, but you could go in the store and get one free donut. Well, there was a fellow who made a deal with himself that he'd drive around the parking lot, and if there were an empty spot, he'd park and go in to get a free donut. And he told after the fact, he said, well, after my 7th time of circling the parking lot, I found an empty spot and went in and got my free donut. And when asked about it, he said, well, I had to. Krispy Kreme made me the free spot. I'd made this deal. No, the truth of the matter is you made this deal with yourself. And the truth of the matter is that you drove around the parking lot 7 times until you found an open spot. Krispy Kreme didn't have the power here. Krispy Kreme only had the power that we gave over to it. And so it is with the devil sometimes, Todd. The only amount of power he's got is the power we're going to allow him to have. It is our choice to not allow him to have that kind of pressure or influence upon us.
Amen. And that demands a viewpoint that looks beyond here and now, too.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes he's going to use the willingness of others to let him have that power to cause harm to us, to try and get us to turn loose of God. And it's amazing how many times he does us wrong and we turn to him to make right what he made wrong in the first place. And we have to avoid that. So as we wind this down, Satan's a real character. He's a rebellious character. He is one who wants to tear us down with him, but he's only allowed a certain limited influence. It's up to us to turn to God and turn away from Satan.
Thank you, Todd and Drew, for taking us back to the Bible for the answers to this important subject today. Our prayer is that all will strive to live our lives in harmony with the will of God. With so many varying opinions, religions, and philosophies in our society today, how can we know for sure? Friends, there is hope. The only hope we have is in the gospel of Christ. For Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free," John 8:32. And that the truth is the word of God, John 17:17.
Todd, one of the things that comes up in the discussion about Satan is, why does God let Satan even exist or have any kind of power at all?
That's a good question. And, when you think about morality, one of the things that distinguishes us from the animal kingdom, there's no such thing as true morality if there's not a choice. And so, like you were saying, this is God using a situation to bring out the best in us, Satan trying to use the same situation to tear us down. I think 1 Peter 1:6-7 has some bearing on this. It says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." So as gold is refined, they would heat it up and they would skim the impurities off the top of it, and you'd have a much purer product at the end. If we'll let God use it to our good, these trials, these temptations that we face will ultimately make us purer.
We have heard the joyful sound.
Thank you for joining us today on Biblical Viewpoints. If you have a question concerning the things taught on this program, desire to enroll in our free home Bible study course, or have some other way we may assist you in your quest to know the truth, you may contact us at Biblical Viewpoints, 137 East C Street, Elizabethton, Tennessee, 37643. In the meantime, we encourage you to find a Church of Christ meeting in your community and worship with them. You will always find a hearty welcome and a group of Christians eager to serve you.